So this is my abortion story, and obviously abortion doesn't just impact one person, which is why I've chosen to have my identity concealed, just to protect other family members. So my story really began as a young child. That I grew up in a family that was supportive in many ways, but also quite preoccupied with other things that were going on in life. Had an older brother that was really in some quite difficult situations as a teenager. And because of that, I think I picked up the message that I needed to just take care of myself and to really just deal with my own problems. So as I grew up into a teenager, I became just involved in boyfriends and parties and that kind of thing. And I think looking back, that was probably just me trying to find love and trying to find that affirmation that maybe I wasn't receiving at home all the time. So as a teenager, I was 15, I discovered that I was pregnant. It was with someone that I was just in a casual relationship with. And I remember thinking that I really only had one option. I had this problem, and I knew that there was a solution to it. And even though I didn't agree with it, I remember discussing it once in a RE class at school and saying, you know, I understand that it's a life and I wouldn't ever do that. But when I was in that situation, all of that went out of the window because the fear just took over. So I went to a clinic that was actually for young people. And that's where I took a pregnancy test and they confirmed that. And they booked all of the appointments for me and everything. And I don't remember ever actually discussing any other options. I went in and I said, this is what I want. And they affirmed that really. So I left feeling like I was doing the right, maybe not the right thing, but the responsible thing. Because the reality was I was 15. My parents didn't really know about my lifestyle, and I didn't have any money or a job. I couldn't support myself. How could I support a child? So I really convinced myself that this was the right thing to do. So between that appointment and the appointment at the clinic, I went to a Mary Stopes clinic. I didn't really think much. I think I just numbed what was going on in my head, in my heart, just got on with life. There was only about 4 days, I think, between that time, so it wasn't very much time to actually reach out to anybody or reconsider. And then on the day of the abortion, I was had to get 2 buses to Mary Stopes. I went on my own. Nobody knew where I was, apart from the nurses that were in that clinic that I'd originally been to. So I went across to the clinic, and I remember going in feeling like this is not a nice day. This is not something I ever thought I would have to do, but I will just go through with this and I just won't ever have to think about it again. And I really believed that. So I went in and it surprised me. I remember seeing that it was busy, and there were lots of women there that were a bit older and were quite well dressed, and just a real mixture of people, not the stereotype of the woman that I thought would have an abortion. And I think that was a comfort to me, because I thought, well, okay, if these women are going through with this, it must be okay. So when I was in there, I think really was just on autopilot. I don't remember thinking or feeling much at all. I had no idea what was going to happen. I knew I was going to have a surgical abortion, but I didn't really know what that meant. I waited to be called, and the first thing that happened was had some blood tests and a scan. And I remember thinking, like, there's just something really wrong about this. Like, I'd imagined from being small that I always wanted to have children. And this was not what I imagined my first experience of an ultrasound scan would be like. And then from there I waited and I was called in to have the abortion. And I think from putting lots of different bits together, I think that I had it under sedation. And the reason I don't know any of this is because the abortion's actually not recorded on my doctor's notes. I only found that out quite recently because it didn't need to be, even though I was 15 and my parents didn't know. That was not something that had to be done. So I went through the abortion. It was degrading, it was embarrassing, it was shameful. I had never even been to an appointment like that with a doctor. So for that to be my first experience of that I found it really, really difficult. I remember being surprised that the doctor was a man. That just felt really wrong to me, that I was this young girl. And yeah, it was a man there. I remember the nurse being really kind to me, almost like she understood that my situation was not good, and she really tried her best to support me. But I left that room just numb. I think I knew something had happened to me that was big, and that I wasn't going to be able to just forget like I wanted to, like I'd promised myself. But I tried my best to do that. In the waiting area, I told them that my boyfriend was picking me up because if someone was coming in a car, I could leave quicker. So that kind of shows how desperate I was to leave. But actually, I wasn't being picked up at all. I was walking to a friend's house, which I now know was about a 40-minute walk away. So by the time I got there, I was in agony. And I suppose that was the first point for me where I really started to question this care for women, care for girls, that nobody was caring for me at that point. Once it was done, once it was over, there was no care. But as a 15-year-old, there was a lot going on in my head and my heart that just were too much. They were too big to deal with. So I just pushed it all down. And I didn't really think about what had happened for a couple of years until a few things happened kind of all at the same time. So I had another friend that had had an abortion when we were in school, and I knew she'd gone through with it, but then we never spoke about it again. And one evening we were out and she just got really upset and she was crying and she was grieving really, and I'd never seen anything like it. It was heartbreaking, and it made me think about what I'd done. And around the same time, my cousin found out that she was pregnant, and I went along to one of her scans. She had a 3D scan, and I saw just the reality of this baby who I loved, and it really started to bring up these feelings for me of what did I do? What really happened that day? And then through a few different situations, I ended up going to a retreat with some friends, and on this retreat there was a pro-life talk, and I was so in denial and so numb, but I think deep down seeking the truth, that I went to this workshop, which I now think is quite courageous and a bit ironic. But I sat in this workshop and I listened to them talk about the reality of abortion and the damage it causes to women, and I really I had to leave. I just was so overwhelmed by everything that had happened. And I spoke to a friend and she just met me with love, just was saying, you know, that there's forgiveness and there is healing, but you need to look at this. So through a few different situations, I ended up going to confession, and I said to the priest, you know, this happened and I am sorry. I know that it wasn't right. I know that I took a life, but I didn't think genuinely there was any other option, so I don't think I can really be forgiven. And when I looked up, he just had tears streaming down his face, and we talked about the reality of the life and the child that I'd lost that day. And through that, I ended up going to a Rachel's Vineyard healing weekend retreat, and I was able to just look at the circumstances that had led me up to that point, and the anger that I felt, and the unforgiveness that I felt, and the shame and the guilt that I'd carried around. And I was able to just speak about that with other people who really understood, with other people who'd been there. And I came to a point of being able to start to let that go and to really begin to accept that on that day, the reason that I felt so empty when I left is because that was my child, that was my first child. And I did lose something, a part of me was left there. And it really was the first time that I acknowledged and just honoured the grief that abortion brings. And it's been a long journey from there. It's been a really gradual healing process for me of just unpacking the layers and really accepting on a deeper level the eternal consequences of abortion, that I am a mother, that I lost a child. And that's the reason really that I am speaking about my abortion today, because it's not the easy option, it's not an easy way out, and I just don't want any other women or girls to have to suffer and go through the things that I've been through. I think I would say to a 15-year-old girl in the same situation to just be courageous and to ask for help. There are lots of people out there that want to help, and you don't have to do this alone. When you find out you're pregnant, your life has changed, and it won't ever go back to what it was before, whichever option you take. But there is support to be able to choose the option that brings much, much less heartbreak and much more joy. Sometimes I do wonder if there would have been people stood outside, if that would have made any difference for me. Honestly, I'm not sure. I'm never going to know that. But what I do think about the whole experience for me was how lonely it was, and how I actually really wanted someone to just let me know they were there and that there was a different way. So if there are any women or men watching this today who might still be living in that place of denial or shame, or just the grief and the darkness of being post-abortive. What I would say is there are so many places and people that want to help you, that this is not something that you have to journey alone with, that there is hope and healing, and that every experience can be used for good. I think without Rachel's Vineyard and without the support that I received there, I would probably still be living in denial. I'd probably still be stuck in that cycle of just self-hatred and just destructive behaviours, and being so confused about why I'm so angry and depressed and struggling with life. I think Rachel's Vineyard really helped me to understand who I am and why I chose what I did, and take responsibility for that, but also be able to move forward in life and not let that hold me back forever. As part of my healing process, I named my child. His name's Joseph, and he is someone that I do feel I'm in relationship with. He is a part of my family, and I've come to really build that relationship with him. I ask him to pray for me, and I know that my life is different because of him and the way that he has been interceding for me and loving me. I think if there's people in your life that have had an abortion, one thing that's really important is to just give them the space to be open and be honest about their experience without any judgment. I think a lot of people who've had abortions carry so much shame and guilt. So being able to accept them lovingly and speak the truth with love to them is the most important thing. But yeah, to have that space. And I think one thing I've found really difficult on my journey is that people who've had an abortion aren't really given the space to grieve. There's no physical place to go, there's no funeral to be had, all of those things. So I think just allowing them to grieve and to cry and to acknowledge that they lost something really precious.